Have you ever wondered if animals can paint? Maybe you're sitting at home right now with an animal companion. Maybe they could be an artist. This is a podcast about visual art at Auburn University. My name is Chris Molinsky from the Jewel Collins Smith Museum of Fine Art. The current exhibition in our Radical Naturalism series is a collaboration with the artist Daniel Newman, who produced a series of paintings with non-human collaborators. Daniel produced this series in response to our collection of work by the 19th century artist John James Audubon. Today we'll learn more about the history of animal art, with some excerpts from a lecture by Dr. Deirdre Smith, assistant curator at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. In her lecture at the Jewel, Dr. Smith connected Daniel Newman's exhibition to a long history of artists collaborating with animals.
So first, I'm pointing to an anecdote about the Japanese artist Hokusai, which recounts that in a competition with a more traditional painter, Hokusai had the novel idea to collaborate with another animal. So he made an image by painting a sheet of paper blue, then dipping a chicken's feet in red paint and urging it to run across that sheet of paper. Hokusai explained that this blue field with red chicken feet tracks was meant to depict a river with maple leaves floating in it. And thus he won the competition. I suspect that story is not true, but it's still revealing, right, of ideas about artists and about artworks made with other animals. Insofar as it is something of an allegory, it's meant to demonstrate Hokusai's cleverness and innovation and his connection to nature, or his skill in working with nature, which in a representational paradigm of art making is the artist's ultimate task. And as the moral of the story suggests, it contributed to his being considered a superior artist.
In Daniel Newman's exhibition, the artist collaborated with more than a dozen animals. In the first room are paintings by a monkey, a rabbit, a sloth, a bird, and a mini horse. The second room are all paintings by dogs. In Daniel's process, he would paint on the canvas first, then send it to one of his animal collaborators, who would choose the colors and the implements they used to paint with. They would paint on top of Daniel's composition and then mail it back to him when Daniel would finish the painting. The paintings are all abstract and look like they were made in the 20th century. They could easily be mistaken for works of abstract expressionism, an entirely abstract composition with paint thrown across the canvas. In fact, this kind of abstract painting in the 20th century raised questions of authorship, agency, and intention by the artists who made them. Dr. Smith picks up that history, where in the 20th century, new forms of art making raised these questions about authorship.
We are now in 1910 Paris, where this painting was displayed at the Salon des Indépendants, and which in that moment might have passed for a work of Fauvism, a human painting movement associated with artists like Henri Matisse and Maurice de Vlaminck that involved using bold, non-representational colors and visible gestural brushstrokes to create scenes. And that name, Fauvism, famously came from the suggestion that these artists painted like wild beasts, or in French, fauves. If we go to the next slide, we can see how this painting was actually made and how it both comments on and literalizes the suggestion that modernist painters are somehow animalistic.
The painting Dr. Smith is describing, called Sunset over the Adriatic, has bright yellows, oranges, and reds on the top half of the painting, with cooler blues and greens underneath. Splashes of red and yellow paint mark the center of the canvas.
While this painting was submitted to the exhibit as having been produced by an artist named Joachim Raphael Boronali, it was actually an image made as a kind of prank initiated by a French author named Roland Dorgelès that involved affixing a paintbrush to the tail of a donkey named Lolo, who lived in the Parisian neighborhood of Montmartre and was the companion animal of the proprietor of a bar called the Agile Rabbit, where a lot of artists hung out and where this infamous hoax was born. With the intention of mocking the Fauvists by proving that a painting made in part by a donkey's tail could fit in with modern art and be accepted into one of the most prominent exhibitions of modern painting at that time.
There's something about Daniel Newman's exhibition that is funny and certainly feels like a joke. But it's also a response to communication, technology, and artificial intelligence. In this series, Daniel was also interested in technology and science, and how new AI tools can help us understand animal communication. What are animals saying? What do they have to say about the environment? These same questions connect to the history of science, and how, alongside artists, other kinds of research projects were investigating animal communication in the 20th century.
I'm now going to spend some time on the history of science as it intersects with the history of non-human animal image making. Coincidentally, this really picks up in the 1910s at the same time that the Lolo prank was orchestrated, and as an outgrowth of the development of animal behavior science and primatology, which involved both trying to understand non-human animal behaviors and capacities, but also in the case of primates and often chimpanzees, trying to probe the contrasts and limits between human and chimpanzee behavior, and in so doing to understand the origins or evolutionary development of certain human behaviors. And as an example of, kind of what this looked like in this early moment, there was a Russian researcher named Nadezhda Kots who observed and experimented with a young chimpanzee that she called Yoni, including by giving Yoni pencils to draw with. And then later she compared Yoni's behaviors and drawings to those of her son, Rudy, and published a study about that. So on the next slide, I'm showing some of the results of the more systematic attempts to study non-human primate mark making or drawing that followed after those kind of initial forays of someone like Coates in the 1910s. And these kinds of studies actually continue into the present moment. Some of the conclusions of this body of research are that some, not all, chimpanzees and gorillas and orangutans can develop an interest in and practice of drawing and mark making that is engaging to them, that will evolve over time, that is not random, that can be trained to an extent, and that will display both individual variation as well as variation by species. And these studies have continued to find uniformly that non-human species never make representational images. They're always abstract or gestural, like the ones that you see here and that you see all around you in the exhibit. I think that all of this is a really interesting point to think about in terms of the context of this exhibit, where there are marks made by so many different kinds of animals. So if you look around just the room where those of you in the gallery are seated, there are marks and images made by a monkey, a rabbit, a parrot, a sloth, a horse. And then in this exhibition, you can look between the images and study the variations in those marks, which are indexes of the different kinds of bodies and brains of those animals, as well as the choices of their caretakers in what kinds of materials they have access to. So for example, I'm inviting you here to think comparatively about the images and marks made by Cody, who is an Australian Shepherd and Border Collie mix, who paints with a brush or a roller in his mouth. And so the marks that you see come from kind of the jerks and swipes of Cody's head. Cody's paintings are in the next room for those of you in the gallery, along with a number of paintings made by other dogs. But on this slide, I'm comparing them to the paintings made by Koa the parrot, which should be next to those of Maki the horse on the far side of the gallery. And you can see that in contrast to those paintings made by Cody and his caretaker, these ones by Koa are very small, They're Koa-sized images, and it's notable that the marks that Koa makes by holding a brush in his beak and moving his head all tend to kind of congregate at the lower register of the canvas, tend to be quite short and kind of point upward and outward in dashes and curves that kind of track the movements of his head and neck while he paints.
You can view all of the paintings in person at the Jewel, where Radical Naturalism Daniel Newman will be on view through December 8th. Dr. Smith's entire talk is available on our YouTube channel, and of course all of the images that she references are there as well. All museum programs, including this podcast, are made possible by listeners like you. Visit our website, jcsm.auburn.edu, to show your support. Thanks.